All right. Good. Let's see what it is today. Wednesday. There it is. Wednesday morning to kiddos. Reviewing a little bit about the Hebrews, taking a few more notes on the Hebrews today. Nothing major, but still just adding on what we were talked about yesterday. Um, so, to really understand the Hebrews, you have to understand the religion of the Hebrews because their whole society is centered around Judaism. If you practice Judaism, you're Jewish or a Jew. And the people who practiced Judaism in the ancient times were known as the Hebrews, this group of people. They were monotheistic. The holy book of the Hebrews is the Torah, which you might know as the Old Testament. The symbol of the Hebrews is the Star of David. And the place of worship of Jews is called a synagogue. The history of the Hebrews really starts with Abraham. He's the father of the Jews. He's considered the first Hebrew. The story of Abraham in the Torah says that God, or the Hebrew word for God is Yahweh, called Abraham out of Mesopotamia and led him to a new land where he was promised to have as many descendants as the sands on the seashore. Sands on the seashore. So that's sort of a seashore. The lineage of Abraham and the stories, really, of these stories are coming from the first book of the Torah, the book of Genesis, which literally means the beginning. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob and Esau. I told you the stories about those yesterday, and I'll review those when we get back, and some on other videos. And then Jacob had 12 sons, one of those being Joseph, who became second in command in Egypt, even though his brothers sold him into slavery, and through the Torah calls some divine intervention, Joseph was made second in command in Egypt because there was a famine in Israel, which is where the Hebrews lived, or the land of Canaan. They needed food. They came down to Egypt. Joseph revealed himself to them and moved all the Hebrews down to Egypt during this famine. And then there came a time period in Egypt when the Egyptians didn't know Joseph, which means the new kingdom starts in Egypt, and because of that, the traditional Egyptians don't want to have anything to do with someone ruling their country or the history of someone ruling their country besides an Egyptian. So they probably erased anything about the Hyksos people, especially Joseph being second in command at that time. So the Hebrews become slaves to the Egyptians. The Torah says that they were, weeping, moaning, complaining, upset of the hard work. Because of that, it says that a deliverer was sent, and that deliverer was Moses. Possibly the story of Moses, who grew up in the Egyptian palace, saw that he was a Hebrew, saw an Egyptian mistreating an Hebrew, murdered that Egyptian, fled out into the wilderness, became a shepherd, and then there's a story of the burning bush, and he was told to go and tell the Pharaoh to let my people go, and then the Pharaoh didn't want to do that, so 12 plagues went upon Egypt, one of those being the last one being the death of the firstborn, and then the Passover celebration of how the death angel passed over the Hebrews' houses because of the blood around their doorway. And still to this day, one of the most important holidays in Judaism is celebrating the Passover, where they eat certain foods that represent the actual event and the actual situation that was going on in Egypt and the passing over of the death angel. So the Exodus begins. Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt. They get to the Red Sea. The Torah says that he lifted his staff up and the Red Sea opened and the Hebrews went on dry land across the way. And then when the Egyptians followed him, kablooey, there goes the water. And the Egyptians did the dead men float, and the Hebrews make it safe on the other side. But the basic main law code of the Hebrews was called the Ten Commandments. Now, I'm sure you've heard the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments is also very important in Christian. But the Torah talks about how that they made it to a place called Mount Sinai, and on Mount Sinai, Moses went up into the mountains and he received the Ten Commandments. And we'll look more about those soon. And then when he comes back down from the mountains with the Ten Commandments, the Hebrews had made an idol of a golden calf, and just the opposite of what they should have done. And so Moses slams the Ten Commandments, the rocks on the ground, they break, and the people who made these idols are punished. And as a punishment, the Hebrews have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, which means that they basically weren't going to get to the land that they were supposed to get to. They were basically wandering, not, lost in the, when it says wilderness, it's not talking about like a forest, it's talking about the desert. There's a story, of course, of the manna and the quail in there. There's a story of after those 40 years, how after the death of Moses, Joshua takes over and leads the people into Canaan, and the story of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. So there's a lot of stuff in there when the 40 years is over. But there's a lot of other laws of the Hebrews besides the Ten Commandments. If you look in the book of Leviticus, the whole book of Leviticus is basically the laws of the Hebrews. So some of the main figures in ancient Hebrew history, probably the most important person outside of Abraham to the Hebrews is David. David was the most powerful king in Hebrew history. He conquered many, many lands. The story goes that you probably have heard the story of David and Goliath. That the first king of Israel was named Saul, and he was always fighting a group called the Philistines. And this Philistine giant named Goliath challenged any Israelite to come out and fight. No one wanted to do it, and this shepherd boy named David come out with his slingshot, and kablooey, there goes down Goliath. And David becomes an instant hero. There's conflict between Saul and David, but over time, David becomes second king in Israel, and conquers much of the land. He's called a man of war, literally, because he's always conquering and gaining new territory for Israel. A lot of the book of Psalms in the Torah was written by David. But David's sort of like the king of ancient Hebrews, and that's why that Star of David is their symbol. Here is David and Goliath. So, a little funny cartoon there. I'm sure you've possibly heard the David and Goliath story. And then tomorrow we're going to talk more about Solomon and his importance to the Hebrews. But go ahead and write those couple notes down, review a little bit. Probably going to have 5 little review questions for you up there to do on the Hebrews. And let me know if you have anything. Also, I'm also posting this on YouTube just so that you have 2 options. If you aren't able to watch the one on Google Classroom because of streaming problems, I'm going to put it on YouTube as well so you won't have that issue. So take care, okay?